helps me, she helps me
Hi,
coordinate
nice
with
to meet you.
SLPs. And she's also a STEM major. So
Okay. And what's your major, Ty?
My major is biology.
Oh, okay. Are you pre-med, both of you?
I'm pre-PA.
Oh, okay. Yeah. There's a huge demand for physician assistants now. And yeah, that's fantastic. And Kume, you're pre-med. Have you thought about what specialty?
Yes, ma'am. I want to specialize in obstetrics and gynecology.
Oh, OBGYN. That is fantastic. Yeah, because there's a huge shortage of OBGYN, and a lot of it has to do with the insurance and the suits and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's fantastic. And Ty, had you decided that there's a specific area you want to become a PA in, or you haven't decided that yet?
I was looking at internal medicine.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. There's a huge need there.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. In fact, my physicians in Louisiana, it's two sisters who went to med school in Texas at Baylor College of Medicine. And their practice is the Louisiana Internal Medicine and Pediatric Associates. And so the acronym is LIMPA. And I didn't really like that at first, but I'm used to it. But yeah, but the internal medicine folks, there's a huge, huge, huge demand. And it's our older daughter is a she's a pediatric allergist immunologist at Baylor College of Medicine. And she's about to start a community clinic there. And there's just such a huge need. You're looking at health disparities, trying to close that gap and make healthcare widely available. I think PAs are really going to be a big help with that because not everybody can get in to see the physician. And PAs can, you guys you can write prescriptions and all of that. In many practices, there's not a big difference. Now, it is much harder, though, to get into PA school than to get into med school.
It is.
You know that? Okay.
Very hard.
Yeah, because they're okay. And is it Puladrin? Is that the way you pronounce it? You can unmute your mic if I'm saying it the wrong way.
Hi.
Oh, okay. Hi. Pronounce it for me.
Cladrin.
Oh, Cladrin. Okay, great. Okay. Yeah. Hi. And I was just saying that with I lost my train of thought, but I thought I was talking about the reason that PAs. It's harder to get in because there's so few PA schools, PA programs. Yes, so fantastic. Okay, and now, did you say Cladrin or Cladrin?
Cladrin.
Cladrin, that's what I thought, yeah. And so what's your major, Cladrin?
Biology.
Oh, okay. Wow. Well, I have a question, a poll that I'm gonna see what people are, but it's interesting that so far everybody is biology. And what year are you, Kume?
I am a senior.
Okay, and Ty?
I'm a junior.
Okay, and Cladrin?
I'm a senior.
Oh, okay. That's you. Okay. Well, it is just about that time, and wow, we're up to 36, which is, I think, maybe even a few more than we were expecting. So
I was having students email me during your first session about it. I'm sure you'll talk about this. Sometimes students can be the biggest procrastinators, myself included. It's okay. So I think we had a few people register a little bit later.
Oh, okay. What were they emailing you about during the other presentation?
About the event.
Oh, okay.
Where to register and things like that. Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So we can get started. So hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Amethyst Marroquin. I am a coordinator for the Department of Diversity Initiatives here at the University of South Carolina, Aiken. I'd like to take a moment to welcome some of our friends from Augusta Tech and from the University of South Carolina in Salkehatchie. We're very happy to have you with us. Because you're not USC Aiken students, you probably haven't ever seen me before, but I'm glad to have you join us, and I'm glad that you're taking this opportunity to learn from the best and the brightest, Dr. Sandra McGuire. So here at the Department of Diversity Initiatives, we try to coordinate programs in conjunction with other departments like the Office of Academic Affairs and the Colleges of Science and Engineering so that we can help y'all be the best version of yourselves. Here at the department, we believe that representation really does matter, and that the best way to motivate y'all is to have people who look like you, who've gone through the same things as you, and who have advice on what to teach you moving forward. So with me, I have two of our best student leaders, Kamei Quarters and Ty Bradley, who are going to be helping us through the Q&A part, which will be towards the end. But now I'd like to give the floor to Dr. McGuire. Dr. McGuire is a great speaker if you had a chance to go to her presentation that she had before this, but she is the director emerita of the Center of Academic Success and a retired assistant vice chancellor and professor of chemistry at Louisiana State University. She's delivered keynote addresses or presented workshops on effective learning strategies for over 400 institutions in 47 states and 10 countries. Prior to joining LSU, she spent 11 years at Cornell University, where she received the coveted Clark Distinguished Teaching Award, and her best-selling book, Teach Students How to Learn, was published by Stylus in 2015. The student version of this book, Teach Yourself How to Learn, was released in January 2018. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Dr. McGuire.
Okay, thank you so much, Amethyst. And thank you everyone for coming. Wow, we're up to 41. This is amazing. I was just hoping for double digits, 10, and we're up to 41. So thank you so much for sharing this time with us this afternoon. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and let me make sure I share the sound and get the first slide up. And okay, yes, can everybody see my first slide? Okay, and I'm going to try to do the chat box. The chat box worked very well in the last session because, oh, it's not cooperating now. Yeah, sometimes I have to click on the participants box first, and then when the participants box comes up, then the chat box comes up. But then as soon as I click on the slide, the chat box disappears, and I have to go through the whole song and dance all over again. And so it seems that this is what's going to happen this time. So kind of bear with me. But I am really, really pleased to be here to share with you this afternoon. And actually, I'll ask this first question for the chat box because some of you may have attended the session that I just did. I wasn't expecting that you would, but since it was open to all students, you could have. So just put yes or no in the chat box for me if you attended the one that I just finished. That was, oh, okay. Oh, wow. Get out of here. Okay, I'm saying mostly yeses. This is amazing to me. Okay, so I know that you are really, really dedicated students because most times when I do, and there's a certain, lots of no's, and it's no problem at all if you didn't, because we're not going to go over everything we did in the first session, but we are going to go over some of those key learning strategies. And so for those of you who were at the other session, then you're going to hear some things again that you heard before. But what I'm going to ask you to do is just, kind of think about if there's another way that you can apply it. So kind of look at it with fresh eyes. And also, I'm going to ask you if you were at the other session, but some of the activities are the same. So don't put the answers in the chat box since you've actually gone through this. Okay, and so again, I want to see who's with me. Since you know a little bit about me, I want to know something about you. So tell me what class you're in. And the students I met earlier, I think there were 2 seniors and 1 junior. And so I'm curious to see if most of you in the session are upper class people or are first or second year students. And so the way we're going to do this is I like to get about 70% of the responses in, and then we're at 70%. I'll give you the 5-second warning, and then we will shut the poll down and we'll see what the results are. So where are we, Stephanie?
We are at 61%.
Oh, okay. So, well, and actually, if we get to 60, I'll start the 5-second countdown. So,
okay. We are now at 69.
Okay. We'll let one more vote come in. Or maybe not. Okay, show us the results. Oh, interesting. Okay, more seniors. And that was the case in the other session. Of course, since a lot of you were in the other session, that would make sense. But we do have some first year, second year. Okay, there's a super senior, and I didn't vote this time, probably more than one. The good news about this information is it is actually very useful no matter what level you are. In fact, I've talked to medical school students, dental school students, law school students, and they didn't know this information either. So the stuff that you're going to be learning today, you can use throughout your academic career and even into your professional career. And so then the other thing that I wanted to find out is what's your major area? And if it's something other, you can just put it in the chat box for me so I'll know what it is. But if it's one of the categories that's on the list, then please just fill out the poll. And we'll see who's with us today.
We're at 50%.
Okay. Keep those votes rolling in. Okay. Okay. Pre-health professions. No humanities or fine arts. Okay. Science or math, psychology, business, criminal justice. Yeah, we didn't have any criminal justice the first session. So, and then education, engineering, computer science. Great. Okay. So I now know who's in the session with us, and this is great. So let me close the poll. And then the last thing I wanted to know is, oh, you know what? I'm going to ask if somebody made an errant mark on the slide, and I think there's a way to either erase it or get rid of it. So, I mean, it's not hugely distracting, but if anybody knows how to take it off, that would be great. And I know many times when I talk to students, we can put the poll question up, Stephanie. Sometimes you're the first person in your family to go to college. And so I'm just wondering, because there's now a national effort to really honor first-generation students and support first-generation students. And there are even programs where faculty members, they have T-shirts that say, I was a first-gen college student. And so I'm just wondering of my students in the session now, how many of you might be first-gen students? And so, oh, okay. So about a quarter are first gen and 3/4 not. Okay, great. And the only reason that I like to know that is sometimes if your parents have gone to college, then they can give you answers to a lot of questions that if they didn't go, they'll be unfamiliar with these. And but there are all kinds of resources available. And I want to applaud those of you who are the first in your family to go to college, because you're going to be starting a trend. You may be the first, but you're certainly not going to be the last, because you'll be an inspiration to your siblings, your cousins, and other folks. Now, I have been to a lot of different schools. I started at Southern University. Okay, let me get the chat box back up by clicking on participants. Okay, it's back up. And so just put in a chat box, yes or no, if you've ever heard of Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, because that's where I started my, okay. Yeah, well, and some of you may, but you may not know. There's this big football game that was always the Friday after Thanksgiving. It was a Bayou Classic. It was on national TV, and we played Grambling College. So Southern is the school that always played Grambling in that Bayou Classic. But that's where I started as a first-year student after 11th grade, because I skipped my senior year of high school. I am probably one of the only people you'll ever meet who does not have a high school diploma, but has a PhD, because I just skipped my senior year. And then the summer after that, I studied at Columbia University in New York City. And then my whole junior year, I spent at the University of California at Berkeley. And it was 1968-69, so it was a very, very interesting time at Berkeley that year. And then the summer after that, I studied at Harvard. And these were special scholarship programs. These were programs, this was back in the 60s, and late 60s. And there were programs for African-American students who were performing very well to give us experiences that would help to make us successful. And there are a lot of these programs, I mean, not the same programs, but similar programs that are around today. And so I'm going to suggest that you look into those. And even the seniors, there are programs that universities have that are focused on graduate school, and there's all kinds of stuff out there. So I would encourage you to look into that. And then I went back to Southern after my summer at Harvard, graduated, and got my master's degree at Cornell and my PhD at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. So I have been to a lot of places. And so I wanted to ask you, because sometimes students worry about, well, did I go to the right school? Am I at the right place? And you probably are like many students in high school. You're applying to all these schools, and you want to make sure you get to the right place. But my question is, do you think does where you go to college make a big difference? Just put yes or no. And when I say big difference, I mean big difference in terms of your career, let's say 30 years down the road. You think where you go to college makes a big difference? Okay, I'm seeing yes. I'm seeing yes with an exclamation point. I'm seeing no. I'm seeing yes. Okay. Well, you might be surprised to find that my perspective is absolutely not. It doesn't really matter where you go. What you do there is what's most important. Because as you saw from the chat box, a lot of you had never even heard of Southern University. That's where I went. And I'm a fellow of the American Chemical Society. I've won lots of international awards. And my university was certainly not in the top 10 or 20 or 100 or 200 probably, but I did very well there. And so when you do very well where you are, that's the thing that's going to make the big difference. And so I want to tell you a story now. This is a true story. Well, all my stories are true. I don't tell any stories that are not true. But this is a story. This is something that happened at a dinner party in Germany back in the 1930s. And there was this Swiss aerodynamic scientist at this dinner party, and he got bored and he started thinking about things that fly. He started thinking about bumblebees. And he started thinking, why should bumblebees be able to fly? They've got this huge body. They have these relatively small wings compared to the size of their body. They are not long. They don't have a long, sleek body with these long wings like a wasp has. And here's another picture of a bumblebee from a different angle. And you can see how big the body is compared to these little bitty wings. And so he started, did the calculations. And he looked at the ratio of the body and the size and the wings. And he kept getting the result that bumblebees should not be able to fly. Did the calculations over and over, got the same result. There's no way bumblebees should be able to fly. But the good news is that bumblebees do not know any aerodynamic science. And so they do not know that they are not supposed to be able to fly. And so they just keep right on flying. And so I like to tell this story when I talk with students because you may experience something like that. So just put in the chat box either yes or no. You can go all the way back to middle school, even elementary school. Did you ever encounter someone who, when you told them that you were going to do something, they acted like they didn't think you were going to be able to do that? So just put yes or no in the chat box. If you ever ran into anybody who, okay, I'm seeing some no's, I'm seeing lots of yeses, and I'm happy for the people who said no. But as you can see, most of us have had that experience. And so you can be just like the bumblebee, those people that I call them naysayers who don't think you're going to be successful. You don't have to pay any attention to them. But I do want you to recognize that there are some things that you are going to face as you climb this ladder. And one of them is those people whose miscalculations, just like that Swiss aerodynamic scientist, obviously he was miscalculating because his calculations show that bumblebees shouldn't be able to fly, and we know bumblebees can fly. And so those people who think that you're not going to be able to succeed, then that's their miscalculations. But now I do want you to expect obstacles as you climb this academic ladder and even in your professional life. And just put in the chat box for me, yes or no, if you ever encountered, and you can start now with your experience at USC Aiken, or wherever you, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that there were students from other institutions. And so I may not call your institution name, but you're included in this. But just put, since you started college, did you encounter something that you didn't expect that seemed like it was going to be a stumbling block? It seemed like it may have come out of left field. You were, on a roll, you were moving right along, and then all of a sudden this thing, okay, yes, everybody has that. And so what I want you to know is that things that look like stumbling blocks may not really be stumbling blocks. They actually might be stepping stones. Because stumbling blocks and stepping stones can look identical, and you get to determine what role they're going to play in your life. And you're going to see students who were not doing well, then they started to do well. And many times students who, when they don't do well, they think, oh, this is a stumbling block to my career, when it really is a stepping stone, because when they didn't do well, they went to the learning center, or they talked to the professor, or they changed things. And they went from F's or D's and F's to A's, whereas people who were not having those obstacles, they just kept making B's or C's and thought that they were doing fine. So you got to see how you can look at something that looks like it's going to be a stumbling block, but really is a stepping stone. And I say that metacognition is the key to that. And so just tell you, I experienced a lot of obstacles during my transition from university freshman. This is the way I looked back in 1966, 67. And then when I went to Berkeley, this is the way I came home for a Christmas break. And my mother was not amused, I can tell you. And this is the way I look today when I have a hairstyle that is not COVID. I was not going to any stylist during COVID. So my hair's not like that now, but it probably will eventually get back to that. But that's kind of my journey. And the strategies that we're going to be talking about really are so successful. Along my journey, I actually was recognized in the Oval Office of the White House when I got this Presidential Award for Excellence in Science, Math, and Engineering Mentoring. And the mentoring that I did was primarily underrepresented students, students of color, and women who were successful in getting their PhD, who most times thought that they were not going to be able to be successful doing that. And again, you can do whatever you set your mind to. The strategies that got me here are all in the book, and some strategies that I didn't use. Now, I want you to recognize that family members are a great part of your support network. This is my dad, my mom. They were actually both teachers. This is my husband. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary in August of this year. Now, those of you who are getting my age from that, figuring out my age, she's been married 50 years, so she must be how old? Well, I got to tell you, I got married when I was 5 and he was 6. We had our first kid when I was 7. Medical miracle. Nobody ever heard about this. Of course, I'm just joking. No, I'm 71 right now and not ashamed to tell you, but he's a physicist. And this is our granddaughter, and these are our 4 grandkids, and these are my siblings. And so definitely use your family as a support network. I just talked with a young lady who was pre-vet, and she said that when she thought she'd failed the test, and she called home, and her mom said, and because she was about to drop out of pre-vet, she told her mom, "No, I can't do this. I'm out of here." And her mom said, no, just calm down. You've always been a great student. You're going to be a great student. And that got her back on track. And a little bit more about my family. He's actually a part of the physics project that won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2017. And we met as first-year students at Southern. I was actually 16. He was 17 at the time. And he's done a lot. And he just retired. He's a professor of American physics at Southern. This is our older daughter, who is section chief of pediatric immunology, allergy, and rheumatology at Baylor College of Medicine. And she founded the food allergy program there. And she's about to start a community clinic in the 3rd Ward of Houston, the area that George Floyd grew up in. In fact, our granddaughter played in the band of the high school that George Floyd went to. And this is another reason that I love to have special sessions with students of color, because I really want you to be so successful, because you're so important to moving things forward in the community. Those of you who are going to be engineers, who are in education, all of the areas that you told me that you're in, professionals in those areas are just so needed in our community. And I like to give you all of the strategies that I can to make you successful. This is our younger daughter. She's my co-author on the book. And she is an opera singer in Berlin, Germany. She went to MIT, though, as an undergrad, did a biology degree, and then went to the University of Oxford to get her master's degree and her doctor of philosophy. And then she got her master of music at Longy Conservatory, and she is an opera singer now, in addition to writing the books that I write with me. And these are our grandchildren who have all taught me something. And so just make sure that you keep that strong connection with your family, because when nobody else will support you, it's your family that will. Okay, and so I say that metacognition is the key on this journey. So I'm going to ask some questions for the chat box, and this is where I'm going to ask the folks who were at the session earlier not to put answers in the chat box since you've gone through this. Just if you weren't at the earlier session, I want you to put answers in the chat box for me. The folks who were there, you can think of the answers, but just don't put them in the chat box, please. Okay, and so when we think about this word metacognition, we're going to dissect this word. And so I'm going to ask, is metacognition, for folks who weren't there earlier, is metacognition, do you think it's a compound word or a simple word? Just put in the chat box. And I got to warn you, I asked a bunch of questions. Typically, no right or wrong answers. This one happens to have a right or wrong answer, but most of them don't. But just put in the chat box for me. Metacognition, absolutely. Okay, no, it's a compound word, actually. It's compound. And I can understand why people who thought it was simple might think that it's simple because you've never seen that prefix before, but it is compound. And so what is the root word, do you think, in metacognition? Now that we know it's a compound word, what's the root of metacognition? So put that in the chat box for me, please. Because if it's a compound word, that means it's got a prefix and it's got a root word. So what is the, yeah, exactly, cognition. And so let me ask, what comes to mind when you hear that word cognition? Now, this is one that doesn't have any right or wrong answers. I just want to know what comes to your mind when you hear the word. Absolutely, thinking. Okay, and so yeah, the mind, the brain, all of those, the way you think. And when you put the prefix meta onto a word, it just means doing that thing about that thing. And so metacognition, if we take thinking as the meaning, then metacognition is just thinking about your own thinking. And so it's your ability to just really analyze your thinking. And the way I explain it, I say it's as if you have a big brain outside your brain looking at what your brain is doing. And that big brain is asking your brain questions. And it's saying, does she really understand this information? Or did she just memorize it last night because the test is today? It is saying, if she's got a project to do, does she realize she needs to start on that thing early and work on it a little bit at a time? Or is she planning to just whip it out the night before the way she did in high school? It is your ability to be consciously aware that you are a problem solver, so that when things come up that you think you might have to ask the professor about that you can't figure out on your own, then you might be able to figure that out. And an example of that would be a lot of the questions that might come up about the course, where you might think, well, oh, I wonder when the next test is. The brain says, well, I wonder when the next test is. Let me go talk with the instructor. And then the metacognitive brain says, no, you don't need to talk to the instructor. We can figure that out. And so then your brain says, well, you know, what am I supposed to do? And your brain says, well, what resources did our instructor give us that might answer that question? And so put in the chat box for me, please, most questions that we come up with about the course, where could we find that information? Put that in the chat box. Oh, and anybody should say, any questions I haven't asked before, even if you were at the earlier session, you can put answers in that chat box because it's different. Absolutely, from the syllabus, exactly. The syllabus, or sometimes the, you know, I don't know if you guys use Moodle or whatever that course site is. Yeah, and the syllabus has really valuable information, but most times students don't scour that syllabus, but you'll find so much useful information. And so the metacognitive brain says, it points you to the syllabus, and you go to the syllabus and you find all this kind of useful information. And it's your ability to plan, monitor, and control your mental processing, so you know if you're understanding something, or if you don't, you just memorize it and you don't really understand it. It's your ability to accurately judge your level of learning. And this question is for everybody because I didn't ask it earlier. Just put in the chat box, yes or no. Have you ever heard a professor at your institution say something like, you know, this is college now, this is the university, you got to kick it up a notch. This is not high school anymore. We operate at higher level. Okay, I'm seeing lots of yeses. Yeah, because we as professors love to say that. Now, let me ask you, what do you think, put in the chat box, what do you think those professors mean? What exactly are they talking about when they say you got to kick it up a notch? This is not high school, this is college. What are they talking about? What are you going to have to do differently? Okay, take responsibility for your actions. Absolutely. Okay, go to a higher level of thinking. Absolutely, the work ethic. You've got to really know that you got to put in those hours and you got to be a great worker. Absolutely. Be more proactive. Fantastic. Okay, going beyond surface level thinking. Yeah, all of those things. And so they're talking about all of that, but they are also talking about something else. They're talking about something that's called Bloom's taxonomy. And so for people who were not in the first session, just put in the chat box yes or no. Are you familiar with Bloom's taxonomy? It's B as in boy, Looms. Okay, I'm seeing some yeses, lots of no's. Okay, we're going to talk about Bloom's because that's really, really an important part of being able to accurately judge your level of learning. And then it's your ability to know what you know, what you don't know. So you don't show up at a test or a quiz thinking, okay, I know this stuff, I'm good. Then you look at the first three questions like, uh-oh, I guess I'm not good. I don't know this stuff. And so I want to ask you some reflection questions because my main goal, one of my main goals in this session is I want you to analyze exactly what you've been doing to learn up to this point in time and see what you might change in order to make your learning much more efficient, much more effective. And so these are questions if you weren't in the earlier one. But the first question that I'm going to ask you to put in the chat box, what would you say is the difference between studying and learning? What's the difference between studying and learning? And this is one where there is absolutely no right or wrong answer. I just want to see what you're thinking. Oh, you study for a test, learn for life, memorizing and retaining, absolutely applying your knowledge. Okay, fantastic. Yes, you are on it. And I got these answers earlier. In the top three that I get, people will say, studying is just memorizing information for a test or a quiz, but learning is when I understand that information, I can apply it to what I already know. I can relate concepts together. Sometimes they'll say that studying is short-term, learning is long-term. Yep, studying is trying to remember, learning is knowing and understanding. And sometimes they'll say studying is tedious, learning is fun. So if we take the difference being that studying is just kind of memorizing information for a test or a quiz that you may not remember, 3 months from now, whereas learning is really understanding that information. For folks who weren't in there earlier, put in the chat box, up to this point in time, would you say you've been more in study mode or in learn mode? So just put that in the, have you been trying to, work for tests, or have you been, okay, yeah. And so I did see a learn mode. That is absolutely great. I'm seeing more study mode. I can tell you I was in study mode when I was in college. I was so into memorizing everything. And so for those of us who were in study mode, we're going to see how to be in learn mode. And I'm glad that so many people are. And I can say those people who are in learn mode, you should have right now, you should be carrying between a 3.7 and a 4.0 GPA. And if you're not, then that probably means that you were not mostly in learn mode. And I'm not saying that you weren't, but if you are, you're doing really, really, really well. And because everybody in this session has the ability to be carrying around a GPA of 3.8 or 4.0. And then the second question, I want to ask you, for which task would you work harder? If I came to you in scenario A, don't put the answer in the chat box yet. Let me tell you, let me set it up for you. If I told you that I came to you as the instructor and I said, look, we're going to have the next test in this class next week. You flunked the first test, so you have to make an A on this next test if you're going to do well in this course. You know how hard you would work for that. Or in scenario B, I come to you as the professor and I say, look, we're going to have the next test in this class next week. And I now regret that I didn't do what everybody in the class kept asking me if I would do before the first test. They kept saying, can you give us a review session? Please give us a review session. And I said, no, we don't do review sessions at college. And so I didn't, but the class did horribly. Everybody failed. And so before this next test coming up, I am going to offer a review session, and you are going to teach that review session. So the class session before the test, I'm going to have you come up to the front of the class and you're going to explain all of the information, paying particular attention to the more difficult information to make sure everybody's prepared for the test the next day. Would you work harder for A or B? So put that in the chat box if you didn't answer it in the earlier session. Okay, B, B, B. Interesting. Okay, I'm seeing lots more B's. In fact, I haven't seen a single A. In the earlier session, I saw quite a few A's. Okay, and so this session is actually more like the students that I typically talk to. Here's an A. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with A because, as I said, there's no right or wrong answers. And typically what I find is the people who say A, they're studying the right way anyway. Okay, here's another A. So if you got that 3.8 to 4.0 and you're in A, then that's okay. But if you are not between 3.8 and 4.0, and you are, I'm sorry, did I see people saying B? Yeah, because most, oh yeah, no, I'm sorry. If you would work harder to make an A on the test, you're studying the right way if you're carrying that 3.8 to 4.0. But if you're not carrying that 3.8 to 4.0, then we might want to look at it a different way. So let me just ask for anybody, well, not just anybody, but those of you who said B, you would work harder for B, put in the chat box for me, please. Why would you work harder for B than you would work for A? And I need to look at about 2 or 3 answers, please. If you said B, and quite a few of you did, why would you work harder for B? Because other people are depending on me. Yes, and that's one. I get 3 common answers. Now I'm seeing the first 2 because other people depend on me or help me understand the material. Okay, and there's one other reason I work harder to teach it to other people. I understand it better and can easily make an A. Yes, Ty, and that's why a lot of the students who say A, and I asked early, and some of the students said, "Well, it's my grade, and I want to make sure I do well on the test." But the people who say B said, "Well, yeah, but I know that if I understand it well enough to teach it, then the A is going to come automatically," and that's the case. And so that's why I say, if you're working harder and you're in scenario A mode, if you're 3.8, 4.0, keep doing what you're doing. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if you're not, then go into B, because you really do need to understand it if you've got to teach it. And the other 2 reasons, and somebody put in the chat box, they say, well, now everybody's grade is dependent upon what I do. So I want to make sure that everybody understands. And then sometimes they'll say, well, I don't look stupid in front of a class. And so they are anticipating questions that might come up, and they are making sure they have the answer to those questions. They want to make sure they say that they can explain it more than one way, because there may be students who might not understand it the first way they explain it. So they got to be able to explain it more than one way. They want to be able to draw charts, diagrams, etc. And so many people say that they would work harder for B. Now, let me ask this. Up to this point in time, just for the folks who didn't answer earlier, up to this point in time, would you say you have been more in scenario A mode? And there may have been a combination, so I want to know what you were more in. Were you more in scenario A mode, where you were working to make A's on tests, or were you more in scenario B mode, where you were preparing to teach the information? So if you showed up at a test and the teacher said, we're not going to have a test today, we're going to, and I know there's combination, but just more. If it's exactly 50-50, then you can say combination. But I want to know which one you were more in, if you were more in one than the other. Okay, and so I'm definitely seeing some A's, and I know that was the case for me. And so the good news is, I love it when people are doing everything wrong, because when you start doing things differently, then you'll see a big difference. And so I'm going to urge you to start being in scenario B mode. And I don't have it in this presentation. I had it earlier, but it was just an example where a student started teaching the information to his betta fish. And when he started teaching it to his betta fish, he went from being in the 60s in biology and chemistry to in the 90s. And so when you go through that exercise of pretending you're teaching, it makes a big difference. Okay, and so now what I want to do is give you some specific strategies by way of introducing you to 2 students. First is Travis, who was a junior psychology student. And when I met Travis, he had essentially failed the first 2 tests. And when I talked with him about 30 minutes before the next test, he made 82, 86 after that. And it was a reading strategy that I taught Travis. And let me just ask, put this in the chat box. Have you ever, or do you ever find yourself, you sit down, you start to read, you get a little ways in, and your mind starts to wander? Does that ever happen to anybody? Okay, yeah, I think it happens to pretty much everybody. And I've got to ask you this: when that happens, if you realize, oh, I wasn't paying attention to this stuff, I don't know what I just read, and you might be 2 or 3 paragraphs down the road, what do you tend to do when you realize, oh, I got this test tomorrow, I got to read this, my mind wandered? What do you do when you realize that you weren't paying attention? Tell me what you do at that point. The minute you realize, oh, I don't exactly, start over, exactly. and reread it exactly. Now, the problem with that is you might get a little bit further this time, but you're not going to get a lot further because you don't have, yet read it again, you don't have any new strategies. And so I'm going to give you a strategy that will address that, which is what Travis used. And then Dana was a first-year physics student who made an 80 and a 54 on her first two tests. She was ready to drop out of physics as a major. She was going to switch to business, but I met with her for about an hour, giving her the strategies we're talking about today, and she ended up making a 91, 97, 90 on the final, A in the course, 4.0 her freshman year. And so it is, this stuff works. Now I'm going to tell you the specific strategies. Travis, his problem was reading comprehension. And so the solution to that is to set your brain up for reading the way that it needs to be set up for reading. Typically, the reason that our minds start to wander after we start is it doesn't have a roadmap and it doesn't really have any focus. And so this strategy will address that. So what we know from cognitive science is that whenever the brain is trying to learn something new, if it starts with an overview, a big picture of what it's about to learn, and then gets individual details to put in that big picture, it's much more efficient than if it just starts out with individual details trying to construct its own big picture. And so the first thing is to preview the text before reading. And an example would be if I'm a psychology student and I want to read a chapter on, it's talking about making sure people continue behaviors. And so I look in there and I see in boldface print, I see positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, punishment. And so my brain knows that this is what this reading is going to be about. And then the next thing is develop questions that you want the reading to answer for you. So I might say, well, I wonder what this thing's going to say is the difference between negative reinforcement and punishment, because they both sound pretty bad to me, but I'm now looking specifically for that information. So I'm now focused. And then when you start to read, just read the first paragraph, stop, put that information in your own words, and then read the second paragraph, stop, put that information in your own words and fold it in what was in the first paragraph, and then read the third and subsequent paragraphs the same way. Now, I have to ask you this because I always stop at this point and I ask students to put in the chat box, does it sound like if you have to do all of that, it's going to take you a long time to finish the reading? Put that in the chat box for me, please. Okay, so yeah, Ty. Now, Ty, were you at the first session or you were not at the first session? Ty, give me a yes or a no. Oh, okay, great. Okay. And people are saying yes. And so actually, Ty, so I'm going to ask you to unmute your mic because you're absolutely right. Most people would say, yeah, it sounds like it's going to take a lot longer. And it sounded to me like it was going to take a lot longer. So Ty, tell me why you say that it's not going to take a lot longer. Unmute your mic and tell us.
If you're previewing the questions and already developing questions in your head and paraphrasing, it makes it easier for you to read it and understand it versus just trying to read it over and over and over and getting stumped up on information.
Bingo. You are absolutely right. Yes. And so that is brilliant. And it sounded to me that it would take a lot longer. So Ty, you're more advanced than I was. But the reason that it doesn't take a lot longer is one of the reasons is you are focused because you got those questions. And there's another reason that it takes not as long. Anybody know what the other reason is? In addition to your being more focused, why else might it not take as long? Put that in the chat box for me, please. And it's related to what you told me you would do once you realized that you weren't understanding. Remember, many people said that they would reread. Well, the other reason is you don't have to do all that rereading. Because as you go through it and you're understanding it, as Ty indicated once we set it up, then you can just go through and you're going to be understanding. See, with the old way, you read a little bit, then you have to go back, read, go back, read, go back, read, go back. But with this new way, you are moving more slowly through the information, but you get to the end point sooner because you're not doing all that back and forth. And you actually speed up as you go through the reading because you're building on your knowledge and your understanding as you go through it. And so I'm going to really encourage you to adopt that strategy. Now, on this next slide is a reading passage that I'm going to have you do. And in the chat box, for folks who hadn't seen it, just put in the chat box, I'm going to tell you it's about a specific task. And just put in the chat box, yes or no, if you think you know what it is. And so let's read that. I'll give you a minute to read it. Okay, you might not have finished the whole thing, but I'm going to take it off the screen and just ask you to put in the chat box for me. Do you think you know exactly what this task is that was being described in that passage? Okay, I'm seeing some no's. You're like me, I had no idea what it was. Okay, and so let me just ask this. If you had known before you started to read what it was about, now I want you to read it again and then just put in the chat box, yes or no. Does it make more sense to you now that you know what it's about? So read it again now that we know it's about doing laundry. Does it make more sense to you? Okay, I'm seeing some, okay, definitely, absolutely, yeah. And so this is just proof that if you take the time to do that previewing so you know what you're reading about, then your brain now can make these connections. Now we know what that thing says. If you have to go somewhere else due to lack of facilities, that's the next step. We know what it means when it says a mistake can be expensive, because now we can put ourselves in that situation. We can see ourselves in a laundromat or a washateria in Texas doing these things. And so that's why it's so important in your classes to do that preview before you start to read, because you're going to be a much more efficient reader. And so just a summary of that, it's called SQ5R. Do that survey before you start to read. Come up with questions you want the reading to answer for you. Do that reading one paragraph at a time while you're reciting in your own words. And you can annotate, you can make notes in the margin if there are particular concepts that you want to make sure that you come back to. In fact, I can tell you there's one young man, he is a computer science major, and I started working with him last year. And when I say working with him, this is just one session. I don't keep working with these students, but we had a session where he learned what you're learning today. And he went from a 1.8, his GPA now is 3.3, he told me. And so, and he just got a scholarship. That's why we talked, because he was so excited about getting this scholarship when he thought he was going to get kicked out of school. And so I asked him, well, what are you doing? And so he said, Dr. McGuire, I now am writing my own textbooks. And I said, what do you mean you're writing your textbooks? And so he said what he would do is when he had the textbook, he would read that, but then when he summarized it in his own words, he would make notes and he would keep all those notes. And then when he went back to study, he would use those notes. So he had kind of a summary of the information in his own words, and it made a huge difference. And so definitely record or write. Then when you get to the end of a section, make sure you review, summarize that information. And the last R is for reflect. Are there any other views? Are there any remaining questions? And I'll give you an example of that. Let's say if you were taking a community nutrition course, and in that course, they said that in order for people to have great nutrition, you need to tell all of your clients that they need to eat a diet that is very rich in fresh fruits and vegetables. Well, suppose you know that your clients live in a food desert, so they don't have access to a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables. What can you tell them that is going to be better for them than eating all of the processed foods from the convenience stores that many of them are, but it's not fresh fruits and vegetables either? So you can reflect and see what those other views are. And in 1 week, or a few weeks ago, I got an email from a high school student and from a graduate school student saying that they were using this strategy and it was making a big difference. Law school students, I've taught it to them, med school students, everybody says that it makes a big difference. And so I want you to implement that. Now, Dana, the first year physics student I told you about, she was just memorizing formulas and using a homework help site. And when I found out she was using the homework help site, I said, Dana, that is cheating, because she seemed to me to be someone who had a lot of integrity. I said, Dana, you're cheating. She said, oh, no, Dr. McGuire, I would never cheat. She said, I'm not using them to do my homework. I'm just using them to get a hint about how to start the problems. And I said, yeah, Dana, I understand that. But when you get to the test or the quiz, do they give you a hint about how to start the problem? And so she realized that that was what was bringing her down. And so when she changed and she started doing the homework problems by not looking at any external aids, then she ended up 91, 97, 90 on the final, and she graduated in physics. She didn't leave physics, and she was very successful. And so there's a strategy that you can use to get the most out of your homework, and that involves studying the information before you look at the first problem or question, and not doing what I did, which was look at the problem and then flip back in the chapter to find an example of the problem you had to work or a discussion of the question you had to answer. Put in the chat box, think back to when you were doing homework. Have you ever done that where if you got a problem to work or a question to answer, you flip back in the chapter to find an example of that problem or a discussion of that question? Just give me a yes or no in the chat box if you've ever done that. Okay, here are my yeses coming. Yep, so you're exactly like me. Okay, so when we did that, and I didn't realize, somebody said guilty, Cladrin. Okay, yeah, and I didn't realize it because I did exactly the same thing, and I didn't know until I started learning this information, the big problem. Because when I did that, I got all the homework problems right because I was using the example. But when I got to the test or the quiz, when they changed it all around, then I was lost. And I said, this stuff doesn't look familiar because I hadn't used my brain to figure out the answers. I just used the textbook author's brain. And so if you study the information before you look at the problems or questions, then when you get to an example, just read the problem statement. Or if it's a question, just read sometimes they'll intersperse these little questions in like a sociology book or something. What do you think that this would have happened? And most people just skip over that, but don't skip those. Pay attention to them. If it's a problem, work it out. If it's a question, answer it. And if it's a problem, work it until you get to an answer. And then just compare the answer you got with the answer that's in the book. If you got the same answer, you can look at what the author did. But if you didn't, try to figure out where your mistake was, because the learning is actually in figuring out what you did for the mistake. And then once you can figure that out, now you've got that in your brain, because you can really learn a lot from your mistakes, and you will see where your brain is having a tendency to go wrong, etc. And so you can work all that stuff out before you get to the test. And that's just the examples. Once you get to the actual homework problem, then treat them as if it's a test or a quiz. Pick 2 or 3 questions, 2 or 3 problems, and then speed them up. Try to work it a little bit quicker. Because what I've found is that many students don't do well on tests, not because they don't know the information, but they just ran out of time. And they ran out of time because they never practiced doing things a lot quicker. They were just plodding slowly through the way they did their homework. I can give you one other tip that I rarely tell students because I forget about it. But this involves test taking. One year, this was about maybe 6 years ago now, there was a young lady who was finishing up her PhD. It was graduation, and so she was there to get her PhD. And she came to my office and she said, Dr. McGuire, thank you. You helped me so much. And I said, well, what did I do? Because I didn't remember. She said, you taught me how to take tests. And I'm thinking, really? What did I say? And so she said, you told me that when I take it, well, first I'll tell you what she would do. She said that I would take tests. I'd sit down and I'd take the test and I'd start with number 1. And then I would go through them in sequential order. But you told me, no, don't do it like that. Take a few minutes at the beginning of the test to look at all of the questions and then start with the easiest question and answer that, and then work up in level of difficulty so that you're answering the hardest questions. But make sure you're keeping an eye on time, because you don't want to run out of time and get to the hard questions. But do the hardest questions last. And so let me ask you to put in the chat box, what advantage do you think it might be if you start with the easiest question on the test? Can you think of any advantage that might result if you do that, as opposed to just going in sequential order? And anybody can answer that question, because I didn't ask that in the earlier session. Yeah, so what? Okay, yeah, we'll help you answer the harder questions. You get those answers correct. And so you're building your confidence. Yep, you're having more time for difficult questions. Absolutely, you are absolutely correct about that. And I think the biggest thing, one of the biggest things it does, is it gives you confidence that you can answer these questions. And as you go through the easier ones, your brain is pulling back information from the course so that when you get to the harder questions, it'll have all this rich information that's already pulled back because it did the easier questions. And build up confidence. You know the answer to the easier questions that can allow you more time, absolutely, to get to the harder ones. And so you can start implementing that strategy also. But work the homework problems if you're taking a test or a quiz. And this is Dana. I think that I did share the sound, I'm pretty sure. Now she talks fairly softly, and so you may have to turn up your volume all the way and listen very carefully. And so I'm going to ask if you can't hear her, because I can't really see the chat box. And if I put the chat box in, she's going to go away. So if you can't hear her, then just somebody unmute your mic and tell me you can't hear her. But this is Dana.
Hi, my name is Dana Lewis Derby, and I am a former student of Dr. McGuire's, and she asked for me to share a little bit of my story with you today. So I met Dr. McGee at a Find Your Major workshop at LSU when I was a freshman. I knew that I wanted to major in physics when I started college, but I quickly found myself failing my introduction to physics class. So I freaked out and thought, you know what, maybe I'm not cut out for this, and decided to attend that workshop. When I went there, I shared my story, and afterwards, Dr. McGuire approached me and asked me if I would consider sticking with physics a little while longer and maybe trying to approach my assignments and my tests in a little bit of a different way. So instead of changing my major, I did. I stayed with physics. Her and I began working together, and she began teaching me some of her strategies revolving around metacognition. I quickly learned that my method of trying to memorize material in order to pass assignments and tests just was not going to cut it. I had to really learn the ability to problem solve, and I essentially had to relearn how to study. I was reading chapters differently, making notes, and essentially completing homework assignments like I had to teach the material to someone else, with the thought behind that being if you can teach it, then you really do know what you're talking about. After working with Dr. McGuire for a full semester, I ended up making an A in my physics course, and I went on to graduate with my bachelor's in physics from LSU with honors, all with Dr. McGuire's help. So I didn't quite know that going to one workshop was going to be so instrumental in setting me up for success throughout my entire college career. My life would be very, very different if I had not met Dr. McGuire that day and implemented the strategies that she taught me. She is absolutely phenomenal, and she really does have the golden ticket of information that's going to push you towards optimal success. So I hope that you enjoy the workshop today. Thanks for listening, and best of luck. Bye.
Okay, I always like to share that. Let me get the chat box back up. I like to share this strategy so that people can see a real person who was flunking and then ended up graduating with honors in physics. And the one thing she got wrong, she said that, we worked the whole semester. I became her mentor. And so we didn't talk about any learning strategies after that first session, but we did work together. But the strategies that she implemented were, she learned in that one session. And to make the strategy work best, though, you got to start the problems early, the day they are assigned, because if you, let me ask this, when do most people start doing their homework? Just put that in the chat box for me. And this is for, yeah, exactly, the night before. Yes. Now, if you start the night before, what is your main goal when you are doing those? Probably before 11:59. Yeah. What's your main goal if you start the night before? Exactly, to complete it, just to get it done. I call that being in get her done mode. You're just in get her done mode. And if you're in get her done mode, you're not going to be able to make yourself use that homework strategy we talked about. And so you have to start the problems early so you give yourself enough time to do it. Don't flip back to see those examples. Don't give up too soon. Spend at least 10, 15 minutes trying to figure out how to solve it, because when you heard Dana say she learned how to problem solve, well, learning how to problem solve involves practice doing problem solving. And you can do this with the homework, but don't spend too much time either before you go back and look that up. Now, why am I confident you can make fast and dramatic increases in your performance? Because I know it's all about the strategies and using your brain. And so this next exercise is one, you're going to see a bunch of numbers on the next slide. And what I'm going to do is give you 15 seconds to start. Well, first you got to find where the number 1 is. And then next find where the number 2 is, and next find the number 3, etc. And when I take it off the screen, I just want you to put in the chat box the highest number you went up to. And again, if you're in the earlier session, don't put it in the chat box, but you can do it just to see if you get even higher this time if you want to. Okay, and so let's start. I'm going to give you 15 seconds to do it. So let's start finding the numbers now. Okay, and stop. And so put in the chat box for me, please, what you got up to. Okay, and you have to do them, just sequentially, starting the number 1. You got to find all of the numbers you see. Okay, so I'm seeing 7, 12, 4, 5. Yeah, most people get in the single digits. Okay, and so now what I'm going to have you do is look at the numbers again and see this vertical line, this horizontal line, and the position of the number 1. And so now my question is, what do you see about how the numbers are arranged? If you look at now, find the 2, the 3, the 4, what do you notice about how the numbers are arranged? And put that in. Yes, absolutely. They are clockwise. Sometimes students say they're in quadrants. Absolutely. So 1 is in this quadrant, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. So now what I'm going to do is give you 15 seconds to find as many numbers as you can. And this time put in the chat box, what is the highest number you got to, finding them, each and every one of them in sequential order. So let's start finding them now. And stop. So what's the highest number you saw this time? Put that in the chat box. Okay, 15, 17, 22. Yeah. So it seems that most people got at least twice as many as they got the first time. And the point of this exercise is to analyze why we could do so much better, because we're not any smarter people than we were a minute ago when we were in the single digits. But there was one major difference between the first attempt and the second attempt. And just put in the chat box, what was that difference? Why could we find so many more the second time than the first time? Put that in the chat box for me, please. Okay, metacognition, absolutely. Okay, yeah, we had a different strategy, absolutely. Yeah, we could analyze our thinking now that we knew. Okay, we realized the pattern exactly. We knew what to look for. And you are absolutely right. We knew how the information was organized. We knew there was a pattern. And this is so important because that's true with your classes also. The idea is to know what the pattern is. Know, how does the information in chapter 5 relate to the information in chapter 2? How does the information in chapter 12 relate all the way back to the beginning? How are these things connected? Because when you understand those connections, that's going to be where that deep learning occurs. And I mentioned earlier Bloom's taxonomy, and I said that that was really important. And Bloom's taxonomy is just a hierarchy of learning levels, where at the very bottom is just straight memorizing information. And for example, if I asked you, what is a buffer solution? If you're remembering, you'll say a buffer solution is a solution that resists a change in pH, because you've memorized that definition, and that's absolutely right. But if I say, okay, that's great. Yeah, you know the definition. Now, how would you put that in your own words to explain it to your 80-year-old grandmother and your 8-year-old nephew using words they understand, giving them examples and analogies from their life? If you could do that, then you're understanding. If you're not, you're at remembering. If you could now use that information to solve problems that you have never seen before, or answer questions you've never seen before, then you're at applying. If you could take any concept, break it into simpler concepts, and explain how all those things fit together to make the big picture, you're at analyzing. If you can hear two theories, two ideas, two arguments, two ways of doing things, two medical treatment plans, and determine which one is more likely to be better than another, then you're at evaluating. And if you can come up with your own thoughts, your own ideas, your own way of doing things, then you're at creating. And so thinking about those levels, I want you to think back to high school. And this is a poll question, so don't put this in the chat box. Answer it in the poll, please. But when you think back to high school, what was the highest level you had to operate to make A's and B's? And I'm not asking you what the highest level was that you operated, but that you had to operate. So if you could make A's and B's by being a good memorizer, then it would be remembering. If you had to be able to put everything in your own words, then it would be understanding. If you got lots of tests and quiz questions that did not look anything at all like what they did in class, it was a level above, and that's applying, etc. And so are the votes coming in?
We are at 36%.
Oh, okay. So bring those votes in. I'm going to give you another 10 seconds, and then we will shut it down. What are we up to now, Sarah?
56.
56 or 6-6?
56.
5-6. Okay. Maybe they're trying to figure it out in faith. But we're over 50%, so we'll see what the results are. Let's show them. Oh, okay. Yes. Okay. Remembering. Most people said remembering, and you're like most of the students I talk with. So this means that you're very self-perceptive. You understand what I'm talking about, and you know where you were. Okay. And so this is where we were in high school. But now at the college level, what do you think the lowest level is that you're going to have to consistently operate to excel in all your classes? To do maybe even better than you did in high school. And certainly make the A's you were making in high school, but even go beyond that. What do you think the lowest level is that you'll have to operate to in order to do that? And just answer that in the poll, please. And the reason that I like to ask students this question after they've been in college for a while, after you've taken some courses, after you've had some tests and quizzes, because now you see what college is all about. And you are much more likely to have a realistic opinion about that. Okay, so where are we in our percentages?
53.
53, okay, so I'll give you 10 more seconds. And where are we now?
You're at
Okay.
60.
Well, okay, got you. And so we're seeing applying and analyzing. So this is great. So you've moved up. This is wonderful. But I'm going to suggest that it might be even a little bit different than that. So let me ask you to just put in the chat box. Do you have any either term papers you've got to do this semester or projects in any of your classes? Put yes or no in the chat box, and I'll see if you're like the group of students I talked to earlier. Okay, yeah, so everybody's saying yes. A lot of students earlier said no, but it seems that everybody here, okay, here's a no, but most people said yes. Okay, now let me ask you, to do an outstanding project or an outstanding term paper, what level of Bloom's taxonomy do you need to be operating at? What do you think? You can just put the number in the chat box for me. If you're going to do an outstanding, absolutely, yes, 6, that's creating. Because the difference between a mediocre project and one that's outstanding is the amount of creativity that goes into it. And so, yeah, so what happens is you're going to have to be at even higher than applying and analyzing. You're actually going to have to be at creating. Now, the good news is we have a great tool that allows you to move yourself higher on Bloom's, and we just call it the study cycle, 5-step process, where before you go to class, you got to preview. And then go to every class. And if you've done the previewing, you're going to be able to stick with the lecturer. You'll be able to answer questions that they are asking, because now you have that big picture, that overview. And then as soon after class as possible, review what just happened in class. Because I've got to ask you, when you hear something for the first time, what part of memory does it go into? when you hear something or see something for the first time, what part of memory does it go into? Because memory has these different parts. And actually, if you haven't taken a psychology course, you may not be familiar with this. And there it goes. Yeah, Q says short-term memory. And if you don't do something to move it into long-term memory, then that information is not going to be available to you. And so as soon after class as possible, you got to start the information moving from short-term to long-term memory. So do that review. And it only takes about 10 minutes to do each of these if you do it efficiently. And so you got to do more than that. And we talk about doing focused study sessions and we show you how to structure those. Set aside 45 minutes, an hour or something. And for the first, but not much longer than an hour, because your brain does get tired. And you might not realize it's tired, but it's less efficient when it gets tired. And so don't go much longer than an hour. But the way you structure it is take a minute or two to set a goal for what you want to accomplish, and then study with focus and action for 30, 40, 50 minutes. Then take a break and reward yourself, and then come back and review. Now, if it's a shorter session, because sometimes students say, well, I have ADHD, I can't study for 45 minutes. And that's fine. If you can study for 10 minutes, do a minute to set a goal, study for 8 minutes, reward yourself. No, you don't have to take a break if it's only 10 minutes, but then come back and review for a minute. And you have to do more of them, but make it work for you. And if you have 20 minutes between classes, you can do one of these and make sure that you just keep those up. And this is a student who is now a PhD candidate in chemistry. And she said, when I asked her of all the strategies, what she thought was the most helpful to her, and she said it was those focused study sessions. We used to call them intense study sessions, but we changed it a couple of years ago because some students were telling us that intense was just too intense a word. They didn't want to deal with that word. So we call them now focused study sessions. And she said that's what helped her the most. She got an A+ on 3 out of 4 of her finals using that method. So it's important to use it every day before your final exam. But during finals week, it's really beneficial because you have so much stuff that you have to cover. And it's really kind of a time management strategy that you can put into place. And so as we kind of recap these effective metacognitive strategies, these are things that we've talked about. I'll always ask why, how, and what if. I want to tell you where that comes from. I was talking to a group of students at a dental school because, again, I talk to students at medical schools, law schools, grad schools, divinity schools. They haven't learned this stuff either. And in answer to the question, what's the difference between studying and learning? One of the dental students said, he said, well, for me, the difference is this. He said, studying is focusing on the what's, but learning is focusing on the how, the why, the how, and the what if. And he said, and I find that I focus on the what and remember the what, then that's fine if the question is only asking at the what level. But if I forget the what's, then I can't recreate them. But if I focus on the why, the how, and the what if, even if I forget the what, I can recreate them on my own because now I know all that additional information. So always ask that. Do those things like practice you're teaching it. Spend some time on every subject every day so you can keep it fresh in your mind. Use that study cycle. I forgot to change it here with focus study sessions. Take advantage of academic assistance and always aim for 100% mastery, not 90% mastery. And you've got an extremely valuable resource, this Center for Academic Achievement. And I always tell great students like you to use that center for the tutors, but become a tutor because you are great students and they're always looking to hire tutors and they pay higher than minimum wage. And so when you're a tutor, in fact, I've had a lot of pre-med students when I was at Cornell University and at LSU, they become tutors to practice for the MCAT because they know that if they have to explain this information, then they're going to understand it a lot better. And so is there anybody in this session, I know in the early one, we had someone who worked at that center. Just put yes, if anybody is in this session who works at the Center for Student Achievement, put it in the chat box, please. And there may not be anybody, but they have tutoring, they have all kinds of stuff. So I highly encourage you to visit that center. So in summary, what can you do? You might have to spend more time on your courses, aim for those higher learning levels, use office hours and study groups productively, use the study cycle with those focused study sessions. Basically, we're saying use your ability now to think about your brain to study smarter. And so here's the last poll question. We've talked about a lot of strategies. And I want to know, which one do you think you're most likely to implement starting now? Because we talked about a lot of stuff. You don't have to do all of them. But, oh, I see. Yeah, this person is tutored at the math lab. Okay, great. And so that's a great resource. And so of all the strategies that we've talked about that are on in the poll now, indicate which one you think you are most likely to use. And I'll give you a minute or so to think about that and answer. And what percent are we up to now?
58.
58, okay, we're getting better. I was thinking it would be either 50 or in the low 50s. Okay, so we'll do the 10-second countdown. What's our percentage?
63.
63, okay, great. So let's see what the results are. Wonderful, okay, yes. And all of these are great strategies. And so I'm glad that you pick, whatever you pick is going to be great. And certainly if you can do more than one, that's great also. And I'm relieved that nobody said none of the above, although I didn't expect in this group anybody would say none of the above. So thank you very, very much. And when I say starting now, you really need to start it now, because if you don't start it immediately within the next 48 hours, you probably never will. Now, what I want you to do tonight, you won't have time to do it now, but I want you to think about what you said you would do, and then visualize yourself doing it and write down the specific steps that you're going to take to implement this strategy. Because once you have that specific plan, then you're much more likely to do it. Because if you don't start it within the next 48 hours, you probably never will. I've got a challenge for you. We're having this metacognition discussion on March 15th. There's still lots of weeks left in the semester. And I think that nobody on this call in this session should have a GPA less than 3.0. And I'm going to say you should see an increase in your GPA, because now you have metacognitive learning strategy. So that's how I know that you can do this. And so in the last minute or so, I want to go back to the bumblebee story that we talked about at the beginning and tell you why bumblebees can fly. Because remember, we said that dinner party was back in the 1930s when aerodynamic science was in its infancy. And it turned out that this aerodynamic scientist was using the calculations that he had learned in aerodynamic science, and he was putting that on the bumblebee. And so the assumptions that he was making was that when he looked at the ratio of the wings to the body for bumblebees, then it would kind of be like the ratio with airplanes. Well, that's an incorrect assumption, because airplane wings and bumblebee wings are very different. Airplane wings are smooth and flat, and they don't move. But bumblebee wings have lots of bumps and zigs and zags, and they are constantly flapping. And it's this constant flapping that creates these airfoils that gives the bumblebee enough lift to stay aloft. So the bottom line is, whenever you see a bumblebee, let it remind you that if anybody says that you are not going to be able to do something that you put your mind to, tell them, check your assumptions. I am a student who has metacognitive learning strategies, and I know I can excel at anything that I try, and then just drop the mic, walk away, and do what you do. Go Pacers. And I didn't have the other mascots, but everybody's on this. Just go and do what you do. Use these metacognitive strategies and just blow everybody away. And so I'm going to now stop the share and turn it back over to Amethyst, and you'll go from there. Oh, and I'm seeing some thank yous. Oh, you're very, very welcome.
That was such a great presentation. I know that we're at time, but we were wondering if you could answer some of our students' questions.
Absolutely, yes. And
Okay.
I can tell you, I can stay longer than you can stay. So I can stay on for another 2 hours. So, but I think what I'm going to do, based on how it's going, because I know that there's some students who will not leave before the session ends because they don't want to miss anything, but they have other stuff they need to do.
Yeah.
And so I'll spend at least 15 more minutes, and then we'll see where we are. But we will end it at some point so that those students who are not going to leave before it ends, we won't be holding them hostage. Okay. Yes.
Ty, do you want to start us off?
Yeah. Hi, Dr. McGuire. What barriers did you face as a Black woman going into the field of STEM?
Okay, that's an excellent question. And I would say the biggest barrier that I faced was that nobody thought that I was credible. They thought that I was in the space because of affirmative action, and I did not have a contribution that I could make. And the introduction that I use for faculty sessions is much longer than the one that I do for student sessions because all of the awards and stuff I've won doesn't mean a lot. But I'm a fellow of the American Chemical Society, fellow of the AAAS, and fellow of another group. And most of the STEM faculty that I speak to, when I show up, either subconsciously or consciously, they're thinking that I'm probably not qualified to do what I do. And I would say that that's the biggest barrier. And so, and I would urge everybody on here, no matter what your area is, you are going to probably be speaking at some point. Carry your introduction with you because I can't tell you the number of times it doesn't happen anymore because now I send my introduction and I carry a copy with me, but I'm maybe about to keynote a conference and 5 minutes before somebody comes up and says, "Oh, I'm doing the introduction. Tell me what you want me to say about you." And that doesn't work so well. But that's the biggest barrier I've faced. And my way of addressing that barrier is to make sure that I am over prepared. I know everything that I need to know. I've gone over it 3 or 4 times. I'm anticipating any questions that might be asked. And I want to start out letting these people know that you don't think I know what I'm talking about, but I know more than you know about this. And then you can actually see the attitudes change. I worked with a graduate student once, and she had to do a seminar. And I asked her, "Well, how's it coming?" And she said, "Oh, Dr. McGuire, it's not going to be the worst one they've ever seen." And I said, "No, that's not the idea. It's the best one that they've ever seen." And that's why when I said, when you aim for that 100% mastery, any question that comes up, I've got to have an answer to everything. And you guys have a tool that I didn't have. I mean, you can pretty much use the web to find out stuff. I was in college right after the stone was rolled away. And so we didn't have those tools. And so it took a lot longer. But you can pretty much find out information about anything. So never go into a situation where you're not confident that you know pretty much everything there is to know about that. You're never going to know everything, but as much as you possibly can.
And Kwame, did you have any questions for Dr. McGuire?
Yes, I wanted to ask you, what was the best advice going through college that you received?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good question. Now, I went to Southern University is an HBCU. And when I was at Southern, the chemistry department had about 28 faculty members. 27 of them were African American, and 25 of them had PhDs. They were recent PhDs from great institutions, Midwest institutions typically, because LSU wasn't even integrated at the time. And they came back and they told us that we could do anything that we wanted to do. So it was this notion that you don't have to be limited by what other people think you can or cannot do, because you can do anything. And also, but you gotta be super prepared. And I see so many students who try to just kind of, slide through. And now that I know about metacognition, I do realize that I wasn't doing everything I could, but I didn't know what the other stuff was that I should have been doing. I didn't know that there was more than memorizing the information, going over and over and over, because my goal was just to get A's in my classes. And I was making A's, looking at the examples and memorizing information. And then I learned later on I could have been doing a lot more. Now, my husband is interesting. As you heard, I met him when I was 16. He was a physics major. I was a chemistry major first year. I didn't know. He's been using metacognition before the term was even coined. But I didn't know that he was doing anything different from what I was doing. And he didn't know I was just memorizing information to make A's on tests. I didn't know that he was practicing explaining the information and all this kind of stuff. So now that I know what to tell students to do, that's the best advice that I can give you. Know that you can be successful in Excel. Know that other people are going to doubt you, but prepare at a level that their doubt is just going to disappear. You tell them, take that somewhere else. Okay, and any other students have questions? Because Oh, okay. Recordings. Okay. Oh, yeah, you can put them in the chat. Or if we want to, you can allow people to raise their hand if they have a question and unmute their mic if you want to. Okay. Any other? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. What are some ways that you think people can make the field of STEM more diverse?
That's an excellent question. I think two things. One is getting kids interested in STEM very early. And there are a lot of organizations like at LSU, there's the Minority Science and Pre-Professional Science Society, there's Nova Shade. So there are these organizations and they will go out and do activities for kids in elementary, middle school, high school. So that, as Amethyst mentioned at the beginning, if kids see people who look like them being scientists, then their idea of what a scientist looks like and what a scientist can do is very different. And so I think going to those schools, letting students know that this is an area that you can excel in, and doing the activities that get them interested in science, and also giving them that confidence, I think is one way. And also recognizing that there still is, unfortunately, a lot of hesitance, opposition. If you haven't seen the video, I Too Am Harvard, I'm going to ask folks, just Google that and look at it. And this was a video that was done by students of color at Harvard after an article came out in the student newspaper that essentially implied that the Black students at Harvard were there because of affirmative action, and they were not as qualified, as other students. And a lot of the microaggressions, the little annoying things that happen. And I think once you understand and expect that this is going to happen, y'all are probably too young to know this song. Mama said there'd be days like this, there'd be days like this. Y'all ever heard that song? Probably not. Okay. Oh, you have. I'm seeing a yes. Yeah. And so it's much easier to deal with things if you've been prepared to expect that than if it just comes at you, out the blue. But being over prepared, getting those students engaged and letting them know exactly what's involved. I think that's what's going to make a difference. Okay, and any other questions? And I understand it's like 10 minutes to 5 here, or 7 minutes to 5, and it's 7 minutes to 6 there. So I can understand why students might say, let us out of here. We don't have any questions. No, let's go. No, I'm just kidding. I don't get that impression from this group. I know that you've been very engaged, and I've really, really appreciated your participation. But what I can say is, if there are other questions and people didn't necessarily want to put them in the chat box or unmute their mic now, if you just send them to Dr. Leverett, and Dr. Leverett, if you collect them, you could send them to me, and I will be more than happy to answer those questions, because I do want everybody's question to get answered.
Sounds great, Dr. McGuire. Thank you for this, for today, for spending this time with us, and for this special session with our students. We really appreciate your insight and your wisdom and your story, and just sharing that with our students. So I know I speak for our students and faculty and staff, and just really appreciate this and appreciate today. So thank you for this. We will.
Thank you. And let me just tell the students that I really appreciate your coming to this, because I know it was optional. You didn't have to be here. And so I appreciate your coming and your participation, and just go out and do great things.
Well, thank you. We really, we do love our students. We think we've got really the best students. We have an incredibly diverse student body, and that's a strength. And so this is a great opportunity for our Office of Diversity Initiatives to come alongside us here, and just to get to talk with you is just wonderful. And again, thank you for all that you are doing, not just in STEM, but in education in general. And again, thanks for your time today. Students, we will have recordings. We have recordings of this. We will post that, and you'll be able to authenticate using your email, your USCA credentials to get access to that. And again, we just thank you all for joining us today. Amethyst, thank you for helping from your office and Student Affairs, and for Ty and Kamei for helping with this as well. We really appreciate you both. So thank you, Dr. McGuire, and thanks everybody.
Thank you.
I see I muted myself. I was going to say thank you and have a wonderful evening, everyone. and a great rest of the semester, and go Pacers.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye.